On the morning of July 10, 1942, machinist mate Albert Knack pressed his face against the cold window of a PBY Catalina flying boat, watching fog roll across the barren slopes of Aleutian Island in the Aleutian chain. His pilot, Lieutenant William Thies, had been navigating by dead reckoning for the past hour through weather so thick they couldn't see their own wingtips. They were supposed to be patrolling near Dutch Harbor, but had become completely disoriented until Knack spotted the Shumagen Islands through a break in the clouds. Now, taking the most direct route back to base, Knack noticed something extraordinary. A dark shape in a grassy valley half a mile inland from Broad Bight, an airplane upside down with tail in the air, Japanese markings clearly visible even from altitude. It was a Zero fighter, the same aircraft that had been killing American pilots at a devastating rate of 12-1 for the past 6 months. They circled twice to confirm their discovery. The aircraft appeared almost perfect, with no major damage, simply waiting in the marsh grass. Marking the position on their map, they turned for Dutch Harbor, unaware they had just discovered the most valuable intelligence prize of the entire Pacific War, an airplane that would reveal every secret the Japanese had used to dominate the skies since Pearl Harbor. However, extracting this aircraft from Aleutian Island and delivering it into American hands would require 3 separate recovery attempts, 2 months of intensive work, and a level of secrecy that would determine who lived and died in every dogfight for the next 2 years. 6 months earlier, on December 8, 1941, the Japanese had struck the Philippines with devastating force, leaving 37 American pilots dead by the end of the first week. The Zeros seemed to materialize from nowhere, faster than anything Americans had encountered, more maneuverable than physics should allow. They could climb at 5,000 feet per minute, outturn any American fighter maneuver, and had an incredible range exceeding 1,500 miles, enabling them to escort bombers deeper into enemy territory than anyone thought possible. These aircraft were flown by pilots who had been training for war since 1937, veterans of combat in China where they had shot down 99 Chinese aircraft while losing only 2 Zeros to ground fire. American intelligence had heard rumors about this extraordinary fighter from Chinese reports, but most commanders dismissed them as exaggerations, believing Japanese aircraft to be inferior copies of Western designs, cheap and poorly made, according to training manuals that proved catastrophically wrong. When Zeros hit Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, 78 participated in the first wave, completely outclassing any American fighters that managed to get airborne. The Curtiss P-40 Warhawk couldn't climb with a Zero, the Brewster F-2A Buffalo couldn't turn with it, and while the Grumman F-4F Wildcat was tougher, it remained slower and less agile. Pilots who attempted to dogfight the Zero died. Over the Philippines during those terrible early weeks, American pilots learned brutal lessons. Captain Jesus Villamer, flying an obsolete P-26 P-shooter, watched Zeros tear through his formation, surviving only by diving away at full throttle. Lieutenant Randall Keaton achieved the first confirmed American kill against a Zero on December 8, but his squadron lost 11 aircraft that same day. At Clark Field, 18 P-40s sat on the runway when Japanese bombers arrived. All 18 were destroyed on the ground, their pilots never getting airborne. By January 1942, official American tactics had become simple and humiliating. If you encounter a Zero, run away. Dive for lower altitude, use your heavier aircraft's superior dive speed and escape the fight. Don't attempt to turn with it, don't try to climb with it, just run. Yet even this desperate strategy didn't always work. Over Java in February 1942, Allied pilots flying Hurricanes and P-40s faced Zeros in repeated battles, suffering a devastating kill ratio of 10 Allied aircraft lost for every Zero shot down. At Darwin, Australia on February 19, 1942, a single raid by Japanese bombers and Zeros destroyed 23 Allied aircraft. The Zero appeared invincible, with returning combat pilots describing it with almost mystical reverence. It could turn on a dime, climb like a rocket, remain airborne for hours, seemingly without weaknesses. However, one man refused to accept the Zero's invincibility. Lieutenant Commander John Thatch, commanding officer of Fighting Squadron 3, VF-3, based in San Diego, had been an aviator since 1930, serving as a test pilot and gunnery instructor known for his tactical thinking. He spent evenings working through combat scenarios using matchsticks on his kitchen table to represent aircraft formations. In spring 1941, Thatch received an intelligence bulletin from the Fleet Air Tactical Unit dated September 22, 1941, detailing the Zero's extraordinary capabilities, superior maneuverability, 5,000 feet per minute climb rate, small turning radius, all attributes his Wildcat couldn't match. Thatch spent weeks seeking a tactical solution, realizing the standard three-aircraft American formation required too much attention watching the leader rather than threats. He switched to a two-plane element, leader and wingman flying side by side separated by approximately a Wildcat's turning radius, with two elements forming a four-plane division. When one element got jumped by a Zero, both would turn toward each other, forcing the Zero pilot to either face head-on engagement or break off and expose himself to the other element. Thatch called this the beam defense position, and though his pilots practiced it relentlessly, he hadn't tested it against real Zeros. That opportunity would come at Midway. On the morning of June 4, 1942, Lieutenant Commander Lance Massey led 12 Douglas TBD Devastator torpedo bombers on an attack run against the Japanese carrier fleet northeast of Midway Island. Thatch and 6 Wildcats from VF-3 provided escort at 1,500 feet above the torpedo bombers. When Massey's flight began their attack run shortly after 800 hours, 20 Zeros dove from the sun and tore into the formation. Thatch's division of 4 aircraft himself, Wingman Ensign Robert Dibb, Lieutenant Brainard Macomber, and Ensign Edgar Bassett, attempted to engage. Bassett's Wildcat was hit immediately, slanting toward the water and exploding. Thatch called for Dibb and Macomber to execute the beam defense, turning toward each other as a Zero lined up on Macomber. Thatch turned hard toward Macomber with Dibb following, the Zero pilot committing to his attack despite Thatch's head-on approach. Thatch squeezed the trigger, his 4.50 caliber machine guns and single 20 cannon hammering a 3-second burst that walked up the Zero's fuselage, shedding pieces before the engine erupted in flames and the aircraft fell away trailing black smoke, the first kill using beam defense. But 19 more Zeros remained with only 3 Wildcats left. Dibb called having a Zero on his tail. Thatch turned toward him. Dibb turned toward Thatch. They crossed paths and the Zero pilot attempting to follow Dibb flew directly into Thatch's firing cone. Thatch hit him with a head-on burst, the Zero shedding engine cowling and bursting into flames, second kill. They continued weaving every 20 to 30 seconds as another Zero attacked, each time positioning one Wildcat for a deflection shot. Macomber, with his radio inoperative, stayed in formation following turns. The 3 Wildcats survived 17 minutes of continuous combat against 20 Zeros. Thatch shot down 3 confirmed kills. Dibb got 1. They lost 1 Wildcat, but Massey and all 12 Devastators were shot down without a single torpedo hit. The beam defense position worked, but required pilots to know, practice, and trust the tactic. Most squadrons had never heard of it, and even when successful, American pilots were merely surviving, not winning. What they truly needed wasn't just better tactics. They needed to understand the Zero's weaknesses, its performance at high speeds, roll characteristics, handling under negative G-forces. They needed test data and actual flight characteristics from an intact Zero. While Thatch fought for his life at Midway, that Zero was crashing on an Aleutian Island 4,500 miles to the north. The pilot was Petty Officer First Class Tadayoshi Koga, 19 years old, born September 10, 1922 in rural Japan, son of a carpenter, small at barely 5 feet tall, but having passed flight training assigned to the carrier Ryujo Flying Zero serial number 4593. The aircraft had left the Mitsubishi Nagoya factory on February 19, 1942, just 3.5 months old, nearly brand new. On June 4th, Koga launched from Ryujo as part of a 3-plane section led by Chief Petty Officer Makoto Endo, with Wingman Petty Officer Tsuguo Shikata. Their target was Dutch Harbor, a naval base on Unalaska Island in the Aleutians, part of a diversionary operation during the Battle of Midway, where the Japanese hoped to draw American naval forces north, while their main carrier strike force hit Midway Island from the west, a strategic feint. Koga's section attacked Dutch Harbor shortly after 800 hours on June 4th, strafing and bombing American installations. The lightly defended base fought back fiercely with members of the 206th Coast Artillery Regiment firing .50 caliber machine guns and sailors on ships adding their fire. Most rounds missed, but some didn't. During one pass, Koga's Zero took several hits, likely .50 caliber rounds, with one bullet severing his main oil line running from the oil cooler to the engine. Without it, his engine would lose all oil within minutes. Koga watched his oil pressure drop, seeing oil streaming behind his aircraft leaving a dark sky trail, his engine temperature rising. In 5 minutes or less, the engine would seize and the aircraft would fall. He radioed his section leader and headed southwest toward Aleutian Island, designated as an emergency landing site with a submarine stationed offshore for pilot recovery. The island featured what appeared to be a long, flat, grassy valley half a mile inland. From altitude, it looked perfect for emergency landing, smooth and solid, or so it seemed. Koga circled the valley once, his engine running rough, temperature climbing, oil pressure nearly zero, maybe 2 minutes before complete engine failure. Shikata circled with him, noticing the grass looked odd with a reflective shine, water reflecting sunlight. He suddenly realized it wasn't solid ground but a bog marsh hidden beneath knee-high grass. Shikata tried to signal Koga to make a belly landing and keep the gear up, but Koga's failing engine left no time for reconfiguration. He had his landing gear down, flaps down, committed to a wheels-down landing. Koga's wheels touched the grass shortly after the Dutch Harbor attack ended, sinking immediately into mud. The Zero's momentum carried it forward, wheels digging deeper, tail rising, then the aircraft flipping violently, throwing up water, mud, and grass, coming to rest upside down with tail pointing skyward and engine buried in bog. Koga remained strapped in the cockpit, hanging upside down from his harness. The impact broke his neck, killing him instantly from the deceleration shock when wheels caught in mud. Koga's wingmen circled overhead, watching the crash, seeing the Zero flip and rest inverted without seeing Koga, uncertain if he was alive or dead. Japanese pilots had standing orders to destroy any Zero crashing in enemy territory, explicit and unambiguous. Strafe the wreckage, burn it, make it unusable, never let Americans capture an intact Zero. They had been trying to acquire a flyable Zero since the war began, with every crashed specimen too damaged. This one appeared almost perfect, just upside down. If Koga was alive, strafing would kill him. Endo and Shikata saw no movement, no signs of life, but couldn't be certain. The submarine waited offshore, they were low on fuel, the attack was over, they had to return to Ryujo. Endo and Shikata made a decision. They left the Zero intact and flew back to their carrier, violating orders. They knew the consequences. An intact Zero in American hands would be catastrophic for Japan, but they couldn't bring themselves to kill their friend. That moment of compassion, that human decision, would change the Pacific War's course. The crash site remained undisturbed for 36 days. Aleutian Island represents one of Earth's most remote locations, barren, volcanic, almost perpetually shrouded in fog. The Aleutian Islands experience some of the world's worst weather conditions: relentless rain, dense fog, powerful winds, and penetrating cold. The valley where Koga crashed remained hidden from standard flight paths, with terrain blocking any view from passing ships. The Zero sat through June and into July's first week, gradually sinking deeper into the bog, though its inverted position ironically helped preserve it by protecting the engine and cockpit from harsh elements. On July 10, 1942, Lieutenant William Thies and his PBY crew spotted the Zero purely by chance. Having been lost in fog, they discovered the wreckage only because they cut across the island rather than following the coastline. The following day, July 11th, a recovery team flew out for assessment. Lieutenant Robert Kermes led the team, landing on the coast and hiking half a mile inland through rugged terrain. At the crash site, they found Koga's body still in the cockpit, hanging upside down from his harness with a clearly broken neck. They carefully extracted him, digging a grave on a nearby knoll overlooking the valley. Without a chaplain, they provided the most respectful burial possible under the circumstances, marking the grave with stones. Then they examined the Zero. Kermes walked around the aircraft methodically, taking notes. The airframe remained intact, wings showed no major damage, the tail stood straight, and the fuselage displayed only minor bullet holes from the Dutch harbor attack. The engine appeared undamaged, the three-blade Sumitomo propeller was bent but reparable, the landing gear sheared off from bog impact, the vertical stabilizer bent, rudder twisted, wingtips scraped, flaps damaged, and canopy cracked. Yet overall, the aircraft remained in remarkably salvageable condition. This Zero could fly again. Kermes immediately reported to Dutch Harbor, prompting rapid Navy response. They dispatched a salvage team with heavy equipment, but nature resisted fiercely. The ship carrying lifting equipment lost 2 anchors battling brutal Aleutian currents, where tides can shift 15 feet in 6 hours and winds regularly exceed 50 miles per hour. The recovery team couldn't move the 5,000-pound Zero, stuck deep in mud's Roman 6 sea-like grip, forcing them to abandon initial efforts. On July 15th, a third recovery team arrived with superior equipment, portable crane, cables, and barge. They worked for 2 days in miserable conditions, cold rain, fog so thick visibility barely reached 20 feet, mud resembling glue. They rigged cables under the Zero's fuselage, the crane straining as cables tautened slowly. The aircraft began moving with a wet tearing sound as it pulled free from sucking mud. They hauled it upright, water and mud pouring from cockpit and engine cowling, allowed it to drain, then began the arduous task of moving it overland to the coast. They built a temporary road through marsh using wooden planks, dragging the Zero inch by inch over another full day to reach the barge. At Dutch Harbor, they righted the Zero and cleaned off the worst mud, filthy but salvageable. They loaded it into the cargo hold of USS St. Mihiel, a transport ship, wrapping and securing the aircraft with armed guards standing watch. Nobody could know what the hold contained. St. Mihiel sailed for Seattle on July 20th, enduring 12 days through rough North Pacific seas, arriving August 1st. From there, the Zero traveled by barge to Naval Air Station North Island in San Diego, California, where the Navy erected a 12-foot-high stockade inside a hangar, with armed Marines providing 24-hour guard. Nobody approached without written authorization from the base commander. The souvenir hunter threat was real, as one stolen part could compromise the entire intelligence operation. The mechanics worked under total secrecy, documenting every removed part, measuring every dimension, photographing everything. They carefully straightened the vertical stabilizer, checking for metal fatigue, repaired the rudder ensuring full range movement, replaced wingtips with fabricated matching pieces, fixed flaps testing hinge points, manufactured new landing struts replacing sheared originals, dressed and reused the bent 3-blade Sumitomo propeller, and patched Dutch Harbor bullet holes with aluminum patches. They repainted the original red Hinamaru roundels with American blue circle, white star insignia. The entire repair process required 6 weeks of meticulous work. On September 20th, 1942, 2 months and 16 days after Koga's crash, the Zero stood ready to fly. Lieutenant Commander Eddie Sanders, the designated test pilot, was 31 years old, a Navy test pilot since 1938 assigned to Naval Air Station Anacostia in Washington. Known for precision and technical analysis rather than flashy flying, he was a methodical pilot who understood aircraft systems and could articulate control sensations, exactly what the Navy needed to extract every technical data point from the Zero. On September 20th at 900 hours, Sanders climbed into the Zero's cockpit for the first time, finding it cramped compared to a Wildcat. Even as a relatively small man, he felt squeezed. The seat was hard with minimal cushioning, reflecting Japanese pilot selection favoring smaller stature. Pilots over 58 would struggle. The instrument panel appeared simpler than American aircraft. Engine gauges on the left, tachometer, manifold pressure, oil temperature. Flight instruments center, airspeed indicator, altimeter, artificial horizon, turn and bank indicator. Remaining instruments on the right, fuel gauges, hydraulic pressure, all labeled in Japanese. Sanders had studied translations but still found the environment alien, though throttle, mixture control, propeller pitch lever, landing gear handle, and flap control were all positioned where expected, just laid out differently. Sanders started the Nakajima Saki engine. It coughed once, caught, and settled into smooth idle, producing a higher-pitched sound than American engines. The propeller arc visible in morning sun. The entire airframe vibrated differently than a Wildcat, lighter, less substantial, almost delicate. Checking gauges showed normal oil pressure, slowly rising temperature, good fuel pressure. Advancing the throttle slightly prompted immediate, crisp response without hesitation. Releasing brakes, the Zero taxied easily toward the runway with light, responsive tail wheel steering, almost too light, requiring adjustment. Lining up on the runway, Sanders advanced the throttle smoothly. The Zero accelerated quickly, its light weight enabling rapid acceleration. At 60 knots, Sanders pulled back on the stick. The Zero leaped airborne with remarkably short takeoff roll, approximately half a Wildcat's requirement. Retracting landing gear produced a solid thunk, raising flaps. The Zero climbed steeply, immediately apparent climb rate exceeding 4,000 feet per minute, possibly approaching 5,000, extraordinary performance. Leveling at 5,000 feet, Sanders tested basic handling. The Zero tracked well in straight and level flight, stable with light but precise controls. At low speeds, the aircraft felt alive and responsive. A gentle turn snapped the Zero into rotation almost effortlessly, impressive low-speed roll rate. Reversing direction brought instant response. Increasing airspeed to 150 knots, approximately 170 mph, maintained normal, light, precise, responsive controls. At 180 knots, ailerons stiffened slightly, just hint of resistance. At 200 knots, 230 mph, the ailerons froze. Sanders tried rolling the aircraft, pushing the stick hard right, but ailerons barely moved, feeling like locked control surfaces. He needed both hands and significant force just to initiate slow roll. The fabric-covered control surfaces ballooned with air pressure at high speeds, becoming rigid and immovable. At 250 knots, physically rolling the Zero at any useful rate became impossible. Maximum effort yielded maybe few degrees bank per second. Combat useless. American pilots in Wildcats or Corsairs could roll hard right or left at high speed while the Zero couldn't follow. Sanders noted this critical finding. Everything changed above 200 knots. Testing roll rate both directions revealed definite asymmetry. The Zero rolled left more easily than right, approximately 20% difference, likely related to engine torque and propeller rotation. Engine turning clockwise from cockpit created rolling moment left. With fabric control surfaces unable to overcome aerodynamic forces at high speed, torque effect became more pronounced. Zero rolling left had slight advantage, rolling right suffered disadvantage. American pilots could exploit this. If a Zero pursued, rolling hard right would make following even harder for the Zero pilot. Next, Sanders tested negative G maneuvers, climbing to 10,000 feet, pushing nose down into dive, building speed to 250 knots, pulling back hard on stick, then pushing forward abruptly to unload wings. 0G, then minus 2G. The engine coughed, sputtered, nearly quit. Sanders felt power drop away, propeller windmilling but engine producing minimal thrust. Pushing nose down restored positive GS, engine caught, power returned. Repeated attempts yielded same results. The Zero's float-type carburetor couldn't maintain fuel pressure under negative acceleration, starving the carburetor, causing engine quit. If an American pilot pushed into negative G dive, any pursuing Zero would lose power and fall behind. This single weakness could save countless lives. Sanders flew 90 minutes on that first flight, testing climbs, dives, turns, stalls, and slow flight, documenting maximum speed approximately 330 mph, respectable but not exceptional, Wildcat nearly as fast, New Corsair and Hellcat faster, rate of climb extraordinary, over 4,000 feet per minute sea level to 10,000 feet, climbing anything America flew, turn radius various speeds, incredibly tight low-speed turns. Tighter than any American aircraft, but above 200 knots turn radius expanded considerably as controls became too heavy for sharp turns. Landing after 90 minutes, Sanders taxied in and shut down. A crowd of officers and engineers awaited by the hangar, everyone eager to hear discoveries. Sanders climbed out, flight suit sweat-soaked, hands aching from fighting high-speed controls, walking straight to the commanding officer with simple first words. He had found critical weaknesses American pilots could exploit: ailerons freezing above 200 knots, slow rolling maneuvers requiring enormous force, asymmetric roll easier left than right, engine cutout under negative acceleration. They now possessed answers, real, actionable intelligence. Sanders conducted 24 test flights between September 20th and October 15th, each revealing more data. He tested the Zero against a Wildcat in mock combat. The Wildcat pilot tried every maneuver. At low speeds, the Zero dominated completely, outturning the Wildcat every time. But when the Wildcat used speed, diving attacks, and high-speed reversals, the Zero couldn't follow. The tables turned completely. Testing armament revealed two 7.7 machine guns in the nose and two 20 cannons in the wings. The machine guns were rifle caliber, inadequate against armored American aircraft. The cannons were effective, but limited to 60 rounds per gun, few seconds firing then empty. The trigger mounted on the throttle rather than control stick felt awkward. Testing visibility showed excellent canopy visibility most directions, superior to Wildcat, but large blind spot behind and below. The headrest blocked view, allowing American pilots diving from above and behind to remain undetected until the last second. Testing durability revealed extremely light construction, aluminum skin thinner than American standards, no cockpit armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks. Few .50 caliber rounds in the right place could cause catastrophic damage. The Zero was designed for performance, not survivability, a deadly knife fighter if close but fragile. Sanders documented everything in his official report, stating the very first flight exposed weaknesses American pilots could exploit with proper tactics. He described aileron freeze above 200 knots, asymmetric roll rate, carburetor problem under negative G, providing specific recommendations. American pilots should avoid low-speed turning fights, use diving attacks from altitude building speed past 250 knots, make single firing pass then zoom back to altitude using speed and climb rate, use negative G dives to escape. If a Zero pursued, roll hard right, Zero couldn't follow as easily. At about 200 knots roll hard before Zero pilot could line up sights. Sanders's report received top-secret classification and distribution throughout Pacific Fleet fighter squadrons. But reading a report differed from seeing demonstrations. the Navy decided to conduct live demonstrations. Lieutenant Melvin "Boogie" Hoffman, a test pilot from Naval Air Station Anacostia, was assigned to fly the captured Zero in mock combat against newly trained pilots. Throughout late 1942 and into 1943, Hoffman conducted dogfighting demonstrations over San Diego Bay, showing pilots exactly how to exploit the weaknesses Sanders had documented. Each engagement tested specific tactics. The first demonstration focused on low-speed turning fights. Hoffman and the Zero effortlessly stayed on the tails of 4 Wildcat pilots through every turn, visually proving the Zero's low-speed superiority and teaching students never to dogfight a Zero at slow speeds. The second demonstration showed high-speed diving attacks. Wildcats starting at 10,000 feet rolled inverted and dove past 250 knots, while Hoffman, starting at 5,000 feet, struggled with frozen controls, painfully slow rolls allowing the Wildcats to complete their dives and zoom back to altitude before Hoffman could properly respond. Students immediately understood: hit the Zero fast and never slow down. The third demonstration revealed the negative G escape. A Wildcat pilot with Hoffman on his tail pushed over hard into a dive, unloading to -2 gs. Hoffman's Zero engine coughed, sputtered, and quit, trailing black smoke as he fell behind while the Wildcat escaped. Students watched the smoke trail and understood: push over hard if a Zero pursues, it cannot follow. The demonstrations continued for months, with hundreds of pilots rotating through the training program. Each flew against Hoffman and the captured Zero, witnessing its weaknesses firsthand and learning survival tactics. Word spread rapidly throughout the Pacific Fleet: the Zero had specific exploitable weaknesses. Don't turn with it at low speeds, attack from high altitude with speed, roll hard right at high speeds, use -gs to escape. These tactics proved devastatingly effective. Marine Corps pilot Lieutenant Colonel Kenneth Walsh, who later achieved 21 kills, credited the Akutan Zero training with saving his life multiple times, stating that knowledge from Koga's Zero provided life-saving information. By January 1943, American pilots began achieving kill ratios that shocked Japanese commanders. From 12-1 Japanese advantage in July 1942, the ratio neared parity by March 1943 and reversed by June 1943. Not because of better aircraft, many squadrons still flew Wildcats, but because of knowledge. American pilots understood Zero performance envelopes. They knew when it was dangerous and when vulnerable, could predict Zero pilot actions and counter effectively. Japanese intelligence officers examining wrecked American fighters documented aircraft improvements. The Grumman F-6F Hellcat entering service in early 1943 was faster, more heavily armed, and more durable. The Vought F-4U Corsair was even faster with superior high-altitude performance. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning could outrun anything at altitude. Japanese analysts concluded American technology had surpassed the Zero, which was partially true, but the real advantage was tactical. Pilots flying older Wildcats also achieved improved kill rates. The knowledge worked against all Zeros regardless of aircraft type. On January 12, 1944, Marine First Lieutenant Robert Hansen, flying an F-4U Corsair from Vella Le Vella, shot down 5 Zeros in one mission using high-speed attack tactics developed from Akutan Zero data: dive from altitude, build speed past 250 knots, make a single firing pass, zoom back to altitude, never turn or slow down. Over 17 days, Hansen shot down 15 more Zeros using these tactics, 20 kills in 17 days. The Zero had transformed from the Pacific's most feared fighter into target practice for informed pilots. By mid-1944, Japanese losses became catastrophic. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot on June 19-20, 1944, saw approximately 650 Japanese aircraft, mostly Zeros, lost against 123 American aircraft. American pilots flying F-6F Hellcats and F-4U Corsairs slaughtered Japanese formations, using tactics exploiting every Akatan Zero weakness. Experienced Zero pilots who survived the early war fell to American pilots with minimal combat experience, not because Americans were in her and lie better, but because they possessed superior information. The Akatan Zero continued demonstration flights through 1943, was displayed as a war trophy at Washington National Airport, then returned to North Island for training new pilots. On February 15, 1945, it was destroyed when a Curtiss S-B-C Helder's collapsing landing gear caused it to skid into the Zero, slicing the fuselage with its spinning propeller. Both aircraft were total losses, but by then the Akatan Zero had fulfilled its purpose. It had revealed the Zero's secrets, trained thousands of pilots, and transformed the Pacific Air War. William Thies, the PBY pilot who spotted the Zero, survived the war, retiring as lieutenant commander in 1946 without official recognition for his discovery. Albert Knack, who first saw the Zero from the PBY window, returned to Michigan as an automotive mechanic, rarely discussing the sighting. Robert Kermes, who led the initial recovery, continued salvage operations in the Pacific, never knowing the full impact of his work. Eddie Sanders, the test pilot, rose to Rear Admiral, rarely discussing the classified Zero tests. Melvin Hoffman, who conducted demonstrations, also became a Rear Admiral, calling the captured Zero one of the Navy's most valuable training tools. John Thatch, developer of the Thatch Weave, rose to full admiral, always citing the captured Zero as the Pacific War's most important tactical development. Tadayoshi Koga's body was repatriated in 1953 and reinterred as an unknown soldier at Chitarigafuchi National Cemetery in Tokyo. His family never learned his fate until researchers determined it in the 1980s. Japanese historians later recognized the Akatan Zero's capture as a blow comparable to the Battle of Midway. Lieutenant General Masatake Okumiya of the Japanese Air Self-Defense Force concluded that losing one intact Zero cost Japan hundreds of pilots and thousands of lives because American pilots learned to counter every Zero advantage. The Akatan Zero has been described as a prize almost beyond value and one of the greatest intelligence prizes of the Pacific War. Small fragments survive in museums. William Leonard salvaged gauges and instruments after the 1945 collision, donating them to the National Museum of the United States Navy. The Alaska Heritage Museum holds aluminum skin fragments and a control stick piece, while the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum preserves instrument panel sections. Most was scrapped in 1945. No complete airframe remains. Only fragments and photographs testify to the aircraft that changed the Pacific War. This intelligence victory emerged not from elaborate spy networks or code breaking, but from a pilot flying off course in impenetrable weather, a machinist mate looking out a window at the perfect moment, a damaged aircraft attempting emergency landing on a forgotten island, and two enemy pilots who couldn't destroy their comrades' aircraft. Endo and Shikata's compassionate decision to leave the Zero intact cost Japan its air superiority. One intact Zero, one test pilot's analysis, one training demonstration series, and American pilots possessed complete knowledge. They understood Zero's strengths to avoid and weaknesses to exploit, knew exact air speeds where it became vulnerable, which direction to roll when escaping, how to use negative GS to disable pursuing engines. They transformed from victims into hunters. The Zero never recovered. It remained Japan's primary fighter through war's end only because Japan lacked industrial capacity for replacement. By 1945, the Zero was obsolete not because Japanese engineers failed to improve it, but because American pilots knew too much. They had studied the instruction manual, learned every secret, and used that knowledge to dominate Pacific skies for the war's final 3 years. The legacy of the Akatan Zero extends far beyond its immediate impact on wartime tactics. It stands as a timeless case study in military intelligence, demonstrating how a single piece of captured equipment can alter the course of conflict when properly analyzed and exploited. The Zero story illustrates the critical importance of technical intelligence, the painstaking examination of enemy technology to uncover vulnerabilities that tactical intelligence alone might miss. While codebreakers at Station Hypo were deciphering Japanese naval codes, and while strategists were planning island-hopping campaigns, it was the mechanical dissection of this one aircraft that gave American pilots the confidence to transform their approach to air combat. The psychological impact cannot be overstated. Before the Akatan Zero's analysis, the Zero had achieved near-mythical status among Allied pilots, an invincible samurai sword in the sky. After the testing and demonstrations, it became just another aircraft with known limitations. This shift in perception was as valuable as the tactical knowledge itself. Pilots who had previously felt outmatched now enter combat with proven strategies, turning fear into calculated aggression. The Zero's aura of invincibility shattered completely during the Marianas Turkey Shoot, where experienced Japanese pilots watched in disbelief as their carefully honed tactics failed against Americans who seemed to anticipate their every move. The methodology developed for testing the Akatan Zero established protocols that would serve American military aviation for decades to come. The systematic approach, documenting every component, testing under various conditions, comparing performance against known aircraft, and translating findings into actionable combat instructions, became the standard for evaluating captured enemy technology throughout the Cold War and beyond. When Soviet MiG fighters defected during the Korean and Vietnam Wars, they underwent similar rigorous testing, with pilots trained specifically to exploit weaknesses identified through these methods. Perhaps the most enduring lesson lies in the chain of events that led to the Zero's capture. History often turns on small moments: a foggy navigation error, a glance out a window at the right instant, a split-second decision not to fire on a comrade's aircraft. The convergence of these random events created an intelligence opportunity that formal spy networks had failed to achieve. This underscores the importance of maintaining alertness to unexpected opportunities in military operations, what strategists now call emergent intelligence. The military personnel involved, from NAC's initial spotting to Sanders' meticulous testing, demonstrated the value of ordinary professionals doing their jobs with extraordinary attention to detail. Today, fragments of the Akatan Zero rest in museums, not as trophies of war but as reminders of how knowledge transforms conflict. The gauges in Washington, the aluminum fragments in Anchorage, the photographs in San Diego, all tell a story about the power of understanding one's opponent. In an era of stealth technology and digital warfare, the fundamental principle remains: technological superiority means little without understanding how to employ it effectively, and even the most advanced weapons have vulnerabilities waiting to be discovered. The Zero that crashed in an Aleutian bog taught generations of military planners that the key to victory often lies not in having better technology, but in knowing how to use what you have against what the enemy possesses.